So to replace the fork seals on the front forks of your motorcycle, the first thing you're going to have to do is remove them from the motorcycle. So I'm just going to show you quickly. I didn't actually do a video on it, but I just took a few pictures and I'll explain how that works. So with the front forks off the motorcycle, I can now get at the fork seals properly. Replacing the fork seals, because they are on this particular fork, is because they are leaking oil quite badly. I've already replaced the fork seals on the first fork, and this is the second fork. Okay, so replacing the fork seals, I think there's a lot of videos out there on how to do this, and what most of those videos show you how to do is how to replace the actual seals themselves. There's actually more to it than just replacing the seals. You should really take a look at the service manual for your model of motorcycle before you attempt this job. Take a read of it and get a good idea of what the job entails, because there can be quite a bit of variation between on the front forks across bike models. Now this front fork suspension is from a 1985 Honda Shadow, so it's actually quite simple, quite basic, but more modern front fork suspension is going to be a little bit more complicated. Now, the service manual for this particular model of motorcycle, I've taken a look at it, and there's actually quite a bit more. While you have the front forks off the motorcycle, it's not just a matter of replacing the fork seals. There is definitely, I think, some parts, the circlips, I actually have bought a replacement circlip. I bought the fork seals before I attempted the job. So there's the fork seals. Okay, they're aftermarket fork seals, they're not original Honda ones. But I have bought a replacement Honda circlip. So the circlip is inside here and it holds the oil seal in place, and I have to replace that because, well, I suspect it's going to be the same problem on this one as on the other fork, but it basically, that circlip was rusted out. So straight away I have to replace fork seals, circlip. You may have to replace the oil. So if you don't know how long that oil has been sitting in that front fork, then you should definitely change it, because it's probably been sitting in it quite a while. I know with this front fork, I replaced the oil last year. I didn't actually put maybe 50, 60 kilometers on the motorcycle before I discovered that the fork seals were leaking. So the oil is good because I replaced it last year. But you might want to have some new high performance suspension fluid on hand to replace the oil as well. The bolts that on the bottom of the front forks, so we have one here that secures the piston and the fork tube into the slider. These bolts can rust and the metal can deteriorate, and if the fork seals have been replaced by other mechanics in the past, they may have damaged these bolts. So I actually did get replacement bolts I ordered them for this particular model, Honda ones. So I was going to replace the bolts, just to put fresh bolts in. If they're 35-year-old bolts, you're better off. They're important. These bolts are very important. You might want to replace them. They actually sent me the wrong bolt. As it turns out, this is the wrong one. Okay. As it turns out, I think these bolts are actually in really good condition, so I won't have to replace them. There is a little bolt here. It's the oil drain bolt. I don't actually have to take this off, but I'm actually going to take it off because I want to make sure that it's not seized in the slider. I'm going to check the spring, I'm going to check the piston, I'm going to check really all the components inside the fork. I'll show you how I do it on this particular model. And then the other thing is you need new copper washers. So the copper washers go on the two bolts here, the drain bolt and the bolt that secures the piston at the bottom. So when you're putting those bolts back on, you put new copper washers on. They're called crush washers, and they provide an oil seal. What else? Before you do the job, you might want to examine the condition of the fork tube. Okay, now this fork tube, you probably can't see it. I'll show you some photos. I'll put them up on the screen there now. But essentially, there's a lot of pitting, so a lot of corrosion on the top of the fork in particular. Down at the bottom, the oil and the fact that the fork tube sits in oil, it actually protects against corrosion and pitting. But up here, where the fork tubes are exposed to the elements for the last 35 years, they're quite corroded. For a new motorcycle, if they're really badly corroded, you might have to replace these fork tubes. You might have to get second-hand ones to replace them, or you might want to buy new ones if they're still available. On this particular model, there is no, I can't, it's 35-year-old, so I can't get replacement fork tubes. So what I can do is I can remedy the pitting using some fine steel wool and 1500 grit sandpaper. Okay, so this is a very fine paper, and you're probably going to spend probably 30 to 60 minutes just wiping that. I actually used metal polish on this fork tube. So I have taken my really fine steel wool, and I am basically, with the metal polish, and it removes most of the rust. I use the sandpaper. I get a good feel for how smooth it is. It's still quite rough up here. I use the sandpaper to sand out any bumps on the fork slider or on the fork tube. because if there is any bumps, they're going to destroy the fork seals as they go in. So I've done that already. I have spent an hour preparing that surface. There is actually still some quite bad pitting. There's some really, really nasty pitting here which could damage the fork seals as they're going back on. So I'll show you a trick that I use to try and avoid damaging the fork seals as I'm getting the oil seals back on. Before you attempt this job, you're definitely going to need a number of tools. Okay, so first of all, I have a little small breaker bar. You might need a slightly larger breaker bar. Just for the fork tube, I needed a 10mm socket. I needed a 27mm socket. I needed a size 6 hex socket. I have, for removing the oil seals, I have a flathead screwdriver, quite a large one, good quality. I have some picks here, which I use for cleaning inside if there's any corrosion or build-up of gunk. I actually use these picks, they're like toothpicks I suppose, for cleaning inside, basically where the seals and the bushings are seated. They need to be very clean before you put it back in, so I have some picks. I have a little valve adjustment tool. So this is there's a little valve at the top of the fork tube which allows me to pump in air into the fork tube. I can release pressure from that by using this little valve adjuster. I need a circlip pliers because, as I said, there is a circlip holding the seals in. To reinsert or to get the bushings and also the oil seal and dust seal seated, I have a oil seal driver. Okay, so I got this on Aliexpress. I'll have a link in the description for this particular size, but you basically, I think I paid about 20-30 euros. So this is probably one of the more unique tools that I have for this particular job. It's probably 20-30 euro I paid for this seal driver, but it's as good as a professional seal driver. I have a measuring tape, I'm going to need that. I have engine and parts degreaser because you need to clean the fork tube, the slider and all the components thoroughly before you reinsert rebuild it, I suppose. I have a lot of cloths here for drying up the mess. I have two different torque wrenches, one for smaller size nut on the end here, and I have a larger one for torquing down the cap on the top of the fork tube and for torquing on the bolt that holds on the piston at the bottom. The torque wrench is also useful for when you reinsert the fork tubes into the motorcycle. There will be 4 securing bolts which need to be torqued down, and there will also be a few bolts that need to be torqued down on the brakes to hold in the brake caliper and for torquing down the bolt that secures the wheel. So they're the main tools that I need. Okay, so let's start off by I'm going to break open the bolt that's securing the piston. Okay, so what you're going to need here for this job is a vise. So I'm going to insert this in a vise. Get So you need to use a soft jawed vice here. Get it good and tight so it's not twisting around. I don't think that's going to be going too anywhere. This is not the best vice, but it should do the job. So to release this nut, I've sprayed it with some WD-40 fast release penetrant. I have a punch here, which I'm going to use just to hit it a few knocks. And this. Should make it a little bit easier to open up. Twisting a lot, get it good and tight. So I just want to break that seal. I don't need to loosen it. Okay. Loosen this back up. Okay. So that's that bolt loosened. Next up, I want to take the oil out. So I can screw off this little plastic cap. I'm going to use the valve to release the pressure. So I can hear the air either going in or coming out. So that extra pressure, air pressure, is released. I can close that back up. Okay. Okay, good and tight. And now I need to release this cap. So this could be quite tight, so let's see how we get on. Okay, okay. Okay. So I need to be careful here because this is going to be pressurized because of the spring. So I need to watch because it'll go flying. So using both hands. Okay, that's that open. Pressures are released. Okay. So there's the little cap bolt. Put that to one side. Next up, I need to take out the spacer, a washer, and the spring. Okay. So I'm just going to take a container or basin for the oil. Okay. I need to take the spacer out first. It's covered in oil. Place that there. And then I can just invert this and start pumping. So, there's the spring. it. Okay, put that to the side. This is good oil, so I'll put it into the container. Okay. So I should put this to the side. Okay, so let's put the good oil into the container. This is not old oil, it's only seen about 60 kilometers. Okay. Shade full, make it a little bit easier. Can also retrieve the little washer that sits between the spring and the spacer. Okay, don't need it all out, but that's it for the moment. Put that to one side. See here that we have just over 500 ml, or a half a litre of oil, which is what I would expect. Should be a little bit more once I drain it fully. So I'll put that to the side. Okay. Okay, spacer washer. I'll clean these off and inspect them for damage. Okay, so next up I want to remove this little drain bolt. Shouldn't have to put this in the vise, should come off easy enough, I hope. So 10 socket. Okay. There is a little crush washer on it, but it'll have to be removed because it's stuck on it to it. Okay, might be as much as I'll get out. And I'll just put that little nut back on loosely. Let's remove this bolt that's holding in the piston. I've already loosened it earlier. So that's the bolt there. Let's clean that off. And now I need to remove the to collect the mess. I need to remove the dust seal, so I will use a flat-headed screwdriver. I don't want to damage the rim, which is made from aluminium, so I need to be careful. Tube while doing this, so I'm going to need an even finer flathead screwdriver. So this is a very small flathead screwdriver. I'll get in somewhere. difficult enough. It's quite secure. Okay, there we have a little bit of a lip. Larger screwdriver. Here we go. Whole way around. Okay, that's it. So there's the dust seal, as you can see. So it's full of crud and gunk and dirt, which I expected. Okay, now in here there is a little spring washer, or a circlip, which secures in the oil seal and the fork tube and the piston. So I need to remove that circlip first. So I actually need to find it. So it's actually full of gunk in here. I don't know if you can see that, but it is absolutely manky. It's pretty disgusting. So my little pick will come in useful here. Help me scrape out all this gunk and find the end of this circlip. So I think it's just there. So I need to leverage this out. Okay, let's start it out. So I've hooked it in with the little hook into the little hole in the circlip, and I've just pulled it this way. And I just keep pulling, and it comes up. Okay. Might be able to do the same the other side. If I can find it. Okay. So I'll just have to keep going with this side. It comes up eventually. There you can see it. Pulling. And then find the other end of this on the other side. Which is not easy. Actually, let me just try with the screwdriver. Leverage it up and out. Might be here. There we go. And there's our other spring clip. And it is covered in gunk. This circlip could possibly be reused. Looks a bit fresher than the circlip that came out of the last fork. So it was actually intact quite well. I actually could have used my circlip pliers to remove that one, but however, it's out now. So with the circlip pliers, or the circlip out, there should now really be nothing holding the fork tube and all that. I should be able to pull it straight out. So I'm just going to hopefully separate them. Move them to the side. The seal. So this can be quite messy, and you want to make sure the parts don't go flying everywhere and then lose parts. So I should be able to pull it up. Okay, not coming up that easy. Okay, so I hit a few bangs back and forth. Before you start doing this, you want to make sure that that bolt is removed. If the bolt is still stuck in there, this isn't coming out. If the circlip is still stuck in there, this isn't coming out. Okay. Just try over this. Good pull. Okay, I can feel it coming. There we go. That's it all now. It's separated. So we have our slider, we have our fork tube. On the fork tube we have oil dripping out, but we have this is our oil seal that we want to replace. This is the backup washer, metal washer. This is the slider bushing, okay, and then we have a second bushing which is slightly embedded in the fork tube. This is called the fork tube bushing, okay. So those three pieces come out, and we'll clean up the end of this. Drop that circlip. Don't want to drop any crap into the oil. Okay. Okay. So most of the mess cleared up. There's the piston popping down. It is seated inside the fork tube. More gunk here. Clean this off. So slide off the oil seal, just slide it up like so. There is our oil seal. Just make note of which way it goes. Okay, so this is the top. I'll put it to the side for a second. Put it over here. We've got our backup washer. Again, note the way that sits in. It actually has a little lip on it, and the lip is upwards, facing upwards. It's just a metal washer essentially. And here we have our bushing. I need more rags. clean that off. As much as we can. Alright. Let's slide out the piston. So the piston slides out this side, this end, along with the rebound spring. Okay, put that there for a second. There's our piston. Clean that off. Aliexpress. And the rebound spring. Okay. So rebound spring looks in reasonably good condition, as does the piston. No damage. Just checking for damage. Okay. Spring looks good. Put it in. Let's use some engine and parts degreaser to clean it out, because that oil was a little bit manky at the bottom. Good. Put that to the side. Okay. So again, changing your fork seals, as I mentioned, is not just about changing the fork seals. You need to check the condition of the bushings. So the bushings, as you can see, there is a copper surface. And it's also covered on, this one here has a blackened surface. This is a Teflon coating. If that Teflon coating is worn more than 3/4, you should replace these bushings. This bushing is borderline, should be replaced. Let me take it off and examine that a bit more. Inside. On the inside, it's not too bad. So this bushing actually seated in the slider, and the fork tube actually slides up and down the inside of it. So I'm really interested on the inside. On the inside, the Teflon coating is quite good. On the outside, where it's really not moving, it is quite worn. But it's about 50% worn. So it's not fully worn. So we could get by with this. We could replace it. I'll probably keep that as it is, as I'm not going to be doing high mileage with this bike. Okay. Clean this on the outside, a good cleaning. I don't want any bits of dirt on it. Let's check inside. Does it look worn inside? It looks okay. it's straight. You can get a machine that measures the truancy of the fork tube to make sure it's perfectly flat. If it's bent at all, you need to replace it. But that's good. Let's clean up this backup washer. It's got a ton of gunk on it. Okay, again, this backup washer will be seated in the slider, so it's not moving up and down. The fork tube is moving up and down inside of it. So I just need to make sure it's nice and clean, that it's not damaged. It's not all scored on the inside either, so it's good. Next up, the spring. Any build-up or residue on it would have to be cleaned with engine parts degreaser, but it's all good on the inside. It's just a normal spring, no cracks, no breakage, looks straight. So next up, I want to measure the length of this spring and make sure it's not shorter than the service limit. So it's 47 centimeters. The service limit for this spring is 46.5. So it's actually not too far off the service limit. I could replace it, but again, it's a 1980s motorcycle. I'm not going to be in a rush to replace this. I'll probably get by with that for another while. But apart from that, the spring is in good condition and it's nice and clean now. Next, I need to clean the slider inside. So I'm just going to take some engine and parts degreaser. Take my rag, clean around it. This is actually really dirty. So I can actually get my steel wool and start cleaning inside it. Okay, so here's the steel wool, and I'm just going to clean inside, make sure these seats are nice and clean. It's still quite gritty. So I'm going to take a little pick, in particular where the circlip sits. I'm just going to clean out all this dirt, because that's just going to get back into your oil and your fork. Use my wire wool or steel wool again, just to give it that final. Okay, I think we should be all good. And one more go of This has to be cleaned as well. This is my oil stop piece, which the piston actually sits in at the bottom. So let me get some fresh paper here. Let's clean out those seats one last time. There may be some crud at the bottom of this slider, so you really need to make sure all that dirt is got out, if there is any. Okay, well, let's go. And then we just need to get all that remaining engine parts degreaser out. Just going to stick that down. Use my long screwdriver. Clean it off at the bottom here. I'm just going to blow it out. And that's it. That's my slider nice and clean. Yep. Happy with that. So we should be ready to start rebuilding. There's a copper washer stuck in there, so I need to just get that out. Properly stuck in there. There we go. That's that old copper washer out. I think it was probably the wrong size. Oops. I can get rid of this now. I'm finished with all of that. So there's a little copper washer stuck on the end of this, which I need to remove. Just have 2 hands. There we go. It's off. Okay, so with my bolts, let's get some new copper washers. Let's check them for size. Okay. It's copper washer number 1. It's ready to go. Copper washer number 2. So those 2 bolts are ready to go. So let's begin our rebuild. So I have taken the fork tube. I have make sure that the 2 sliders are on it. The backup washer is inserted correctly. And I'm going to insert the piston with the rebound spring. It has its own little plastic bushing on it as well at the top of the piston. It's all nice and clean. Okay, there it is down at the bottom. Okay, so that's all looking good. Next up, I want to take my oil stop piece that goes on the end of the piston. Take my slider, which is now nice and clean, and I insert it like so. Down to the bottom slider. Let's turn it around. Now, next up, I have already put my new copper washer, crush washer, on the end of this bolt that goes into the piston. Now on the end of this bolt, I need to put some thread lock. Now before I do that, do one last check that I have everything. Making sure that you have all your pieces in that you should. That you're not forgetting something, because you don't want to be going on doing this again. So, thread lock. Just a small amount of thread lock. Should hopefully be enough. Insert it. Should meet the piston. I'm gonna thread it in. Okay. Take my piece here. Close that up. Now I'm going to take my torque wrench, yeah, it's actually set at 21, I think, 21 Newton meters. It's set to tighten. And I need to torque this to spec. Insert it in here. Okay. securing in. So when I turn this up, it's not all going to come sliding out, apart from the fork tube. Okay. So next up, I want to make sure that the bushing, the fork tube, or the slider bushing is seated properly. So I can just let that down for the moment. I'm just going to hit it a few taps with the fork seal driver. So you can see that there's a little bit of a gap here, so it's still not seated. There we go. That's the bushing is now seated along with the little washer. Okay, so next up I want to insert the new oil seal. So here's my new dust seal. Here's my new oil seal. So I just check it. It has little, I suppose like a little metal tightener, or it's like a little tiny spring that goes the whole way around, and it just keeps it tight. Seal, and then there's one in here as well. So there's two little springs there to make sure that the seal works as it should. So they're all in place. This is the way it should be. You can't just put it in whatever way you want. It has to go seated properly. There will be an indicator as to which is up and which is down. So this is actually up, and I actually can compare it to the old seal. So there's the old seal. Okay, that's up, and this is down. So you can see they're quite similar. Okay, only this one is nice and clean. So make sure I have good clean gloves before I start working on this. I don't want to get dirt on that seal. So let me just take the cover off. So what I want is a little bit of oil. Where did I put my oil? Don't want to waste too much, but I can waste a little bit. So I just need a little drop. That's enough. I need to re-oil this seal. This new seal. So it's got plenty of oil on it now. It should be good to go. Okay. Now the problem is when if you insert that oil seal, so again the problem is if I put that oil seal on like there is little gouges at the top of the fork tube which could damage the seal. So I've seen some people use a piece of plastic that goes around, a bit like in this shape, that wraps around it, and they put the seal over the oil, or they put the seal over the piece of plastic, on so, and then they slide it down. Now the pieces of plastic can be a little bit too thick. It's very hard to get you need a very thin piece of plastic, otherwise you're going to stretch that seal. So what I use is grease-proof paper. So this is just grease-proof paper that I got from the kitchen. I cut a piece that is just about the right size. I'm going to put it on about here. and I'm going to oil it up, get it covered in oil. So I'm actually going to use the oil from the seal. Just going to get it all over this piece of paper. Put it down inside, dip it in the oil. Get it nice and greasy. Okay. So the grease-proof paper will be very thin, but when you get oil on it, it won't disintegrate the way paper will. But it's quite flimsy, so you have to be careful. You don't want to be getting pieces of grease-proof paper to tear off and get stuck between the oil seal and the fork tube, because then the oil seal won't work. But this should work now. So put it up at the top. Let me see. Okay, so take my piece of grease-proof paper. I'm just going to wrap it around like that. Okay, make sure I'm putting it on the right way. Okay, so don't jam it on, just slowly twist it around and it should go on. Okay. Now, I need to slide it down on. Tearing ever so slightly, but it's enough to just get it down past all those bits, the pitting. Okay, and now I just need to slide it off the grease-proof paper. So slowly, just it will come off easy if you have oil on it. So bring up my fork tube up to the top. Okay. Okay. Okay, so there's the grease-proof paper. Remove that. Okay. Just check your oil seal. Okay. And place it in. Seat it in. So. Take my oil seal driver. Now I need to start driving it down. So you keep driving it until you can see the seat for the circlip. so I can take it off and just inspect it. How far are we? Just a little bit more to go. And I can see the seat for the circlip the whole way around. Okay. My new circlip. There's my new circlip. Take my circlip pliers. So it just sits in like so. Might have to be compressed a little. Okay. That circlip went straight in nearly. I'll just check in with Yep, it seems to be seated perfectly. I'll just check it in better light. Next up, I need to put my new dust seal in. So that should actually go on quite easy. There's the dust seal. Seat it at the back first. Okay. And then seat it at the front. Okay. So that's seated. That's better. And now seat it at the front. There we go. That's better. I'm happy with that. I'll just give it a little thump. That's. And just check it around the edges. All good. Okay, next up I want to close up this, so I'll take my little 10. Don't need this too tight, just enough to seal the washer. start putting the internals back into the fork. We start off with the spring. The more compressed end is at the top. Spring. Okay. Now we need the spacer. So we take our spacer. Sorry. Need our little washer that goes on top of the spring. So the washer is in, then the spacer. Okay. So I actually need to pull up the fork tube as far as it will go, so that's to its maximum. Okay. And now we need to refill it with oil. So I need about 470 milliliters of oil, of fork oil. There's about 500 ml here, so I need about, that's 450, that's 475, so I just need to leave a little bit of oil in it and I should be done. So 500. So let's add the oil. Okay, another little bit to go. Just a small drop more. That should do it. Okay. And now we just need to put the cap back on. It's the fork tube cap. Make sure it's nice and clean. Make sure the little air vent or valve is closed, which it is. Otherwise oil will come out along with air. And I can just, it's going to take a little bit of force to push it down and then screw it in. Okay, so we have the screw started. Just get it hand tight. To tighten this, you need to torque this down. I think it's about 20 Newton meters. I will do that when this is reinstalled on the motorcycle. It'll be one of the last things I'll do. For the moment, the valve is shut. I will yeah, no, it should be fine actually. The pressure should be okay at that. I didn't reopen it with the last fork tube, so I won't reopen it with this one. So it should have the same pressure. And the cap goes back on. And now that plastic cap doesn't have to be torqued on, it's just a little cover, that's all it is, plastic. And that's our fork tube with the oil seals, the dust seals replaced. Bushings, springs, all checked, nicely cleaned, new copper washers, and I can just test it now a few times. I can just stick it down. everything seems to be working as it should. My fork is nice and dry. I'll clean it off just to make sure. I'll do it again. Okay. And you will, once this is back on the motorcycle, you will have to keep an eye on your forks seals or the fork tubes for a few weeks. Make sure that there is no oil. These should be bone dry if you've installed your seals correctly. Okay, just check it. It's nice and dry. I'll do my that squirting noise is the oil getting pushed through the piston. And there you can see it's bone dry, so that should be working